There's a moment right after someone disrespects you where time slows down. You feel it in your chest first, tight, heavy. Then your mind starts racing. You replay their words. You imagine what you should have said. You feel the urge to respond, to defend, to prove something. And in that moment, it feels like they have power over you. But what if I told you they don't? What if the truth is they never did? Think about it carefully. Not emotionally, not defensively. Just observe, because the truth is uncomfortable. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You were never hurt by them. Not really. You were hurt by what their words triggered inside you. And that changes everything. Because if they were the cause, you'd always be at their mercy. Anyone could control your peace. Anyone could shake your state. Anyone could decide how you feel without your permission. But that's not how reality works. It only feels that way because you've never been taught how your mind actually operates. From the outside, it looks simple. Someone says something, you feel something, cause and effect. But internally, it's much deeper than that. What they said is just a stimulus. Neutral, empty. It only gains power when it passes through your interpretation, your memory, your identity, your expectations. That's where the reaction is born. Not in them, in you. And I know part of you resists this idea because if they're not responsible, then who is? You already know the answer. And that's why it feels uncomfortable, because it means you've been giving away your power your entire life without realizing it. Every time you reacted instantly, every time you took something personally, every time you let someone's words define your emotional state, you handed over control. Not because you're weak, but because you were conditioned, programmed, trained to react. You weren't taught to observe. You weren't taught to pause. You weren't taught that there's a space between what happens and how you respond. And inside that space is your power. Most people never find it. They live their entire lives inside reaction. Someone disrespects them, they react. Someone ignores them, they react. Someone criticizes them, they react. Like a script running in the background, automatic, predictable, controllable. And the harsh truth is, if someone can predict your reactions, they can control you. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally. And that's where real power exists. Not in forcing others, but in mastering yourself. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But most people read that and misunderstand it. They think it means suppress your emotions, ignore what you feel, become cold. That's not strength. That's avoidance. Real strength is something else entirely. It's awareness. It's the ability to feel everything without being controlled by anything. And that's a completely different level of existence. Imagine this for a second. Someone insults you. Instead of reacting, you notice the feeling rising. You observe it, not judge it, not suppress it, just see it clearly. The tension, the heat, the impulse to respond. And instead of becoming that reaction, you stay still, not weak, not passive, just unmoved. And in that moment, something shifts. The chain breaks. Because now, you're no longer reacting. You're choosing. And that's where your freedom begins. But to reach that point, you need to understand something deeper. Because reactions don't come from nowhere. They come from conditioning, from past experiences. from unresolved emotions, from identities you've built over time. When someone disrespects you, it's not just about what they said, it's about what it means to you. Maybe it triggers a memory, a time you felt small, ignored, rejected. Maybe it hits your identity, the version of yourself you're trying to protect, the image you want others to see, strong, respected, in control. And when that image is threatened, you react, not because of them, but because of what you're afraid of losing. Your identity, your sense of self, your perceived value. That's why two people can hear the exact same words and react completely differently. One gets angry, the other laughs. Same stimulus, different internal world. And that proves something important. The cause is not external. It never was. It's internal, always has been. But here's where it gets even deeper. Most people don't actually want control. They say they do. But what they really want is validation. They want to feel respected, seen, acknowledged. And when they don't get it, they suffer. Not because something was taken from them, but because something they expected wasn't given. And expectation is the hidden source of most emotional pain. You expect people to understand you, to respect you, to act a certain way. And when they don't, you feel wronged, disrespected, hurt. But here's the truth most people avoid. Nobody owes you that. Not their respect, not their understanding, not their approval. And once you truly accept that, something changes. You stop reacting to what people do and start observing why they do it. Because most of the time, it's not about you. It never was. People act from their own wounds, their own insecurities, their own unresolved chaos. When someone disrespects you, look closer. Really look. Is it confidence? Or is it insecurity trying to appear strong? Is it control? Or is it fear of losing it? Most people who try to put others down are trying to lift themselves up. And once you see that clearly, without emotion, something shifts inside you. You stop taking things personally, not because you're numb, but because you understand. And understanding creates distance. Distance creates control. And control creates power. But this isn't about becoming passive. This isn't about letting people walk over you. This is about something far more dangerous, becoming untouchable. Not physically, not socially, but mentally, emotionally, where no one can enter your mind without your permission, where no one can disturb your peace unless you allow it. And that level of control is rare because it requires something most people avoid: self-awareness, brutal, honest, uncomfortable awareness, seeing your triggers, your patterns, your emotional weaknesses, not to judge them, but to understand them. Because once you understand something, it loses its unconscious control over you. And that's where the transformation begins. Not when the world changes, but when you do, quietly, internally, without announcement, without validation, just a shift from reaction to observation, from chaos to control, from being affected to being aware. And once that shift happens, you'll start noticing something strange. The things that used to disturb you no longer do. The words that used to trigger you lose their weight. The situations that used to control you become irrelevant. Not because the world changed, but because you did. And that's the beginning, not the end. Because in the next part, we go deeper into the hidden mechanism behind your reactions, the part of you that operates without your awareness, the part that decides how you feel before you even realize it. And once you see it clearly, you'll understand why you've been reacting your entire life and how to finally stop. Most people believe they are in control of their reactions, but if you slow down and really observe yourself in moments of tension, you'll notice something unsettling. The reaction comes first. The awareness comes after. It happens in a fraction of a second, before logic, before reason, before choice. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already inside the emotion, already defending, already justifying, already reacting, which means you were never in control to begin with. Not in that moment, because something else acted first. Something deeper, something automatic, something you didn't consciously choose. This is the part of you most people never see. The unconscious pattern, the hidden script, the internal mechanism that has been running your reactions your entire life. Quietly, consistently, predictably, and until you become aware of it, it will continue to control you. Not occasionally, but constantly. Think about the last time you felt triggered, not just slightly annoyed, but genuinely affected. Maybe someone disrespected you, ignored you, dismissed you, and instantly something inside you reacted. Not slowly, not thoughtfully, instantly. That reaction didn't come from the present moment. It came from your past, from accumulated experiences, from emotional imprints that were never fully processed. Because your mind doesn't just store memories, it stores meanings, interpretations, associations, and over time, those associations become automatic responses. So when something happens in the present, your mind doesn't ask, what is this? It asks, what does this remind me of? And then it reacts based on that. Not reality, but memory. This is why your reactions often feel disproportionate, why something small can trigger something intense, why a simple comment can feel like an attack. It's not about what just happened. It's about what it connects to. Deep inside you, Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that's exactly what's happening. You think you're reacting to the moment, but you're actually reacting to a pattern, a script that was written long before this situation ever occurred. And that script is built from your identity, the way you see yourself, the way you believe others should see you, the roles you've accepted, the image you're protecting. And the moment that image is threatened, the script activates automatically. If your identity is, I must be respected, any sign of disrespect becomes a threat. If your identity is, I must be liked, rejection becomes painful. If your identity is, I must be in control, uncertainty becomes unbearable. And in each case, the reaction is not a choice. It's a defense mechanism designed to protect the identity you've built. But here's the problem. That identity is fragile. It depends on external validation, external behavior, external approval, which means your emotional stability is always at risk, always dependent, always vulnerable. And that's why you react. Not because you're weak, but because you're trying to protect something unstable, something constructed, something that can be shaken. But what if you stopped protecting it? What if you stopped identifying with every thought, every feeling, every reaction? What if instead of saying, this is me, you started seeing, this is happening within me? That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because Now you create distance, and distance breaks identification. When you identify with a reaction, you become it. When you observe it, you separate from it. And in that separation, you gain control. But most people never reach that point because they're too busy reacting to notice what's happening, too busy defending to observe, too busy being inside the emotion to step outside of it. And that's why their patterns never change. Because you cannot change something you're not aware of. Awareness is the first step, not action, not discipline, not control, just awareness. Seeing clearly without judgment, without resistance, without trying to fix anything, just observing. When the reaction arises, notice it. When the emotion builds, feel it. When the impulse to respond appears, watch it. Not as you, but as something happening within you. And at first, it will feel strange because you're used to reacting instantly. You're used to being inside the experience. But with practice, something begins to shift. The reaction slows down. The gap appears. That space between stimulus and response starts to widen. And inside that space, you'll find something you've never had before. Choice, not force, not artificial, real choice. The ability to respond instead of react. And that's where your power begins to grow. Not in controlling others, not in controlling situations, but in controlling yourself. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because even if you become aware of your reactions, even if you create that space, there's still something else that pulls you back into the pattern. Something more subtle, more hidden, your emotional attachments, the things you're unconsciously holding on to, the expectations, the need to be seen a certain way, the need to be treated a certain way, the need to feel a certain way. These attachments create tension, internal pressure, a silent demand that reality should match your expectations. And when it doesn't, you react. Not because something is wrong, but because something didn't go the way you wanted. And most people never question that. They assume their expectations are valid, that people should act a certain way, that situations should unfold a certain way. But reality doesn't operate based on your expectations. It operates based on countless variables outside your control. And the more you resist that, the more you suffer. The Stoics understood this clearly. Epictetus said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." That's not passive, that's power. Because when you release the need for things to be different, you remove the source of your emotional disturbance. You stop fighting reality. And when you stop fighting reality, you stop reacting to it. But this doesn't mean you accept everything blindly. It means you stop attaching your emotional state to outcomes you can't control. You act where you can, you accept where you can't. And in that balance, you become stable, grounded, unshakable. But to reach that level, you need to see one final truth. Most of what you feel is not caused by the present. It's caused by accumulation, layers of unresolved emotion, patterns that were never questioned, reactions that were never observed. And over time, they built a system that now runs automatically. But once you see it, once you become aware of it, that system begins to lose its power. Not instantly, not completely, but gradually, because awareness disrupts automation. And the more aware you become, the less automatic your reactions are, until one day something happens that would have triggered you before, and it doesn't. Not because you forced yourself, not because you suppressed it, but because the pattern is no longer there. And in that moment, you realize something. You're no longer being controlled, not by others, not by your past, not by your unconscious patterns. You're present, aware, in control, and that changes the way you move through the world, quietly, powerfully, without needing to prove anything, without needing to react to everything, because now you understand something most people never will. It was never about controlling the world. It was about understanding yourself. And in the next part, we go even deeper into one of the most dangerous illusions that keeps people trapped in reaction. The illusion that everything is personal. And once you break that illusion, you become untouchable in a way most people can't even comprehend. There is one illusion that has more control over your emotions than anything else. It's subtle, almost invisible. And because of that, it shapes your entire reality without you even noticing. The illusion that everything is about you, that what people say is about you. What people do is about you. How they act, how they respond, how they treat you somehow reflects your value, your worth, your identity. And the moment you believe that, you lose control, because now your emotional state depends on other people's behavior, their moods, their perceptions, their opinions. And that's a dangerous place to live, because people are unstable, inconsistent, unpredictable. One day they respect you, the next day they don't. One moment they understand you, the next they misinterpret everything. And if you take that personally, you'll constantly feel like something is wrong, like you need to fix something, prove something, defend something. But what if none of it was ever about you? Not their tone, not their attitude, not their reaction, not even their disrespect. What if everything you've been taking personally was actually a reflection of them, their state, their past, their internal conflicts? Because think about it. When someone is calm, grounded, secure, do they feel the need to attack others, to belittle, to disrespect? Or is that behavior usually coming from something else? Insecurity, frustration, unresolved emotion. People don't act based on who you are. They act based on who they are. And once you truly understand that, something shifts inside you. You stop asking, why did they do this to me? And start asking, what's going on within them? And that shift removes the emotional charge. Because now, you're no longer the center of the situation. You're just witnessing it. But most people resist this idea because taking things personally gives them a sense of importance. It makes them feel like the center of the world, like everything revolves around them. But that same illusion is what causes their suffering. Because if everything is about you, then everything can hurt you. Every comment becomes a judgment. Every action becomes a message. Every silence becomes rejection. And you start living in a constant state of interpretation, overanalyzing, overthinking, reacting to meanings that may not even exist. But when you drop that illusion, when you truly see that most things have nothing to do with you, you experience something rare: freedom. You stop trying to control how people see you. You stop needing approval. You stop reacting to every shift in behavior, because you understand people are not thinking about you as much as you think they are. They're thinking about themselves, their problems, their insecurities, their own internal dialogue. And occasionally, you cross their path. And whatever state they're in at that moment, that's what you experience. Not truth, not reality, just their current state. And once you see that clearly, you stop attaching meaning to it. Someone ignores you, maybe they're distracted. Someone is rude, maybe they're overwhelmed. Someone disrespects you, maybe they're insecure. But none of that defines you, unless you decide it does. And that's the key. The moment you assign meaning, you create emotion. Not before, not during, after. Meaning comes first, emotion follows always. Which means if you change the meaning, you change the emotion. But most people never question their interpretations. They assume their perspective is reality, that what they feel is truth. But feelings are not facts. They are reactions, and reactions can be misleading, distorted, influenced by past experiences, by identity, by unconscious patterns. That's why one person sees disrespect and reacts with anger. Another sees the same situation and feels nothing. Same event, different meaning, different emotion. And that proves something critical. The power is not in what happens, it's in how you interpret what happens. And interpretation is a choice. Not always easy, not always immediate, but always possible. The moment you pause and question your initial reaction, you create space for a different perspective. And in that space, you regain control. Instead of assuming intention, you observe behavior. Instead of reacting emotionally, you analyze calmly. Instead of taking things personally, you detach. Not emotionally numb, but mentally clear. And that clarity makes you dangerous in a way most people can't understand. Because now, you're no longer predictable. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer controlled by external stimuli. You see things as they are, not as your emotions interpret them. And that changes how people interact with you, because most people are used to reactions. They expect you to get angry, to defend, to respond emotionally. And when you don't, it disrupts their expectations. It removes their leverage, because they can't control what doesn't react. And that's where real respect begins. Not when you demand it, not when you chase it, but when you become unaffected by the lack of it. That's when people start to notice something different about you, something they can't easily define. Calm, stable, unshaken. And that presence speaks louder than any reaction ever could. But this doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It doesn't mean you accept disrespect without boundaries. It means your response is no longer emotional. It's intentional, measured, controlled. You choose when to engage, when to walk away, when to speak, when to remain silent, not based on impulse, but based on awareness. And that level of control is rare, because it requires something most people avoid: letting go of the need to be seen a certain way, letting go of the need to be validated, letting go of the idea that everything is about you. Because once you let go of that, you stop reacting to shadows. You stop fighting illusions. You start seeing reality clearly, and reality is simple. People act based on their internal state, not your worth, not your value, not your identity. And once you understand that deeply, fully, without resistance, something inside you becomes untouchable. Not because the world changed, but because your perception did. And perception shapes everything. But there's still one layer deeper, one final trap that keeps people emotionally controlled, even when they understand all of this. The need to respond, the urge to prove, the compulsion to say something, do something, react in some way, just to feel in control. And in the next part, we break that completely. Because true power is not in reacting differently. It's in not needing to react at all. There is a moment right before you react that most people never notice. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's there. The urge, the pull, the internal pressure that says, say something, do something, don't let this slide. And if you're not aware, that urge controls you, not the situation, not the other person. That urge, because it feels like power. It feels like if you respond, you regain control. If you defend yourself, you protect your image. If you say something back, you restore balance. But that's the illusion. Reacting doesn't give you power, it reveals where you don't have it. Because if you were truly in control, you wouldn't feel the need to react instantly. You would have the ability to choose. And most people don't realize this. They think reacting is strength, speaking up immediately, responding emotionally, matching energy. But that's not strength, that's compulsion. That's being pulled by an internal force you don't control. Real strength looks different. It's quiet, controlled, intentional. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't need to respond to everything because it understands something deeper. Not everything deserves a reaction, and more importantly, not every reaction serves you. Think about it. How many times have you reacted and later regretted it? Said something you didn't mean, escalated a situation that didn't need escalation, gave energy to something that didn't deserve it. In the moment, it felt right. It felt justified. But that's the trap. Immediate reactions feel right because they're driven by emotion, not clarity. And emotion is temporary. But the consequences of your actions are not. This is why the Stoics place so much emphasis on restraint, not suppression, not avoidance, restraint. The ability to hold back, not because you're weak, but because you're in control, because you see the bigger picture, because you understand that reacting impulsively is often a loss disguised as a win. You might feel powerful for a moment. You might feel like you defended yourself. But what did it actually change? Did it improve the situation? Did it elevate you? Or did it just pull you down into the same level of chaos? Because that's what reactions do. They pull you into the energy of the situation. They take you out of your center and place you inside the conflict. And once you're inside, you've already lost control. Real power is staying outside of that, observing without being pulled in, seeing clearly without being affected, choosing your response instead of being driven by impulse. But to do that, you have to let go of something most people are addicted to, the need to prove that you're right, prove that you're strong, prove that you deserve respect, prove that you're not someone to be disrespected. And that need is what traps you. Because the moment you need to prove something, you've already given your power away. You've made your value dependent on someone else's recognition, someone else's acknowledgement, someone else's reaction. And that's not power, that's dependence. True power doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need to be acknowledged. It exists regardless, quietly, confidently, unshaken. And when you operate from that place, something changes. You stop reacting to be understood. You stop speaking to be validated. You stop engaging in situations that don't align with your standards because you no longer need anything from them. Not their approval, not their respect, not their agreement. And that removes the emotional charge completely. But here's where it becomes dangerous, because when you no longer react, people notice. They feel it, even if they can't explain it. Because most interactions are based on emotional exchange, reaction and counter-reaction, energy and response. But when one side stops reacting, the dynamic breaks. The usual patterns don't apply anymore, and that creates discomfort for them, not for you, because now they can't predict you. They can't control the interaction. They can't pull you into their frame. And that's where your power becomes visible, not through force, not through words, but through presence, calm, still, unmoved. And that presence is stronger than any reaction because it communicates something without saying anything. I'm not affected. I'm not controlled. I don't need to engage. And that message changes how people treat you, not because you demanded respect, but because you demonstrated control, and control commands respect naturally. But this doesn't mean you never respond. It means your response is no longer automatic. It's deliberate, strategic, chosen. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence. Not passive silence, not avoidance, intentional silence, the kind that comes from clarity, from knowing that engaging would lower your position, that responding would give unnecessary energy, that speaking would serve no purpose. And in those moments, silence is not weakness, it's dominance, because it shows that you are not controlled by the situation, you are above it. But there will be times when a response is necessary, when boundaries need to be set, when action needs to be taken. And when that moment comes, your response will be different. Not emotional, not reactive, clear, direct, controlled. You won't speak from anger. You'll speak from certainty. You won't act from impulse. You'll act from awareness, and that difference is everything. Because people can feel it. They can sense when you're reacting and when you're choosing, and they respond differently to each. Reaction invites conflict. Control commands respect, but to reach that level, you have to break one final habit, the habit of filling every space with action, every silence with words, every discomfort with reaction. Because discomfort is not something to escape, it's something to observe. When you feel the urge to react, sit with it. Don't move, don't speak, just observe the feeling, the tension, the impulse, and you'll notice something interesting. It rises and then it fades, like a wave. And if you don't act on it, it passes. And in that passing, you realize something powerful. You are not your impulses. You are not your reactions. You are the one observing them. And that realization changes everything, because now you're no longer controlled by what you feel in the moment. You're grounded in something deeper, something stable, something that doesn't shift with every external stimulus, and from that place, you move differently. You speak less, but with more impact. You react less, but with more precision. You engage less, but with more authority. Because now, every action is intentional, not driven by emotion, but guided by awareness. And that's the level most people never reach, because they're addicted to reacting, addicted to proving, addicted to being involved in every situation. But you, if you see this clearly, can step out of that completely. You can become someone who is not easily moved, not easily triggered, not easily controlled. And that makes you rare, dangerous in a quiet way, because now your power is internal. not dependent on anything external. And in the next part, we go deeper into something even more subtle. The hidden expectation that keeps pulling you back into reaction, even when you think you've let go. And once you see it, you'll understand why true detachment is not about distance, but about freedom. There is something even more subtle than reaction, more hidden than ego, more dangerous than impulse. It doesn't show itself immediately. It doesn't feel like a weakness. In fact, most people think it's completely normal, but it's the very thing that keeps pulling you back into emotional disturbance, no matter how aware you become. Expectations, not the obvious ones, not the ones you say out loud, the silent ones. The invisible contracts you create in your mind without realizing it. The belief that people should act a certain way, that they should understand you, respect you, respond the way you expect. And when they don't, something inside you reacts. Not always outwardly. Sometimes it's quiet, a shift in mood, a feeling of disappointment, frustration, resentment, but it's there. And it's controlling you more than you think. Because expectation creates attachment, and attachment creates vulnerability. The moment you expect something, you tie your emotional state to an outcome you don't control. And that's where the problem begins. Because reality doesn't follow your expectations. People don't behave according to your internal script. They act based on their own perspective, their own priorities, their own state of mind. And when that doesn't match what you expected, you feel affected. Not because something was wrong, but because something was different. And most people never question that. They assume their expectations are valid, that people should behave a certain way. That situation should unfold in a certain direction. But based on what? Your preferences, your past experiences, your personal standards? None of that controls reality. It only creates friction with it. And that friction is what you feel as emotional discomfort. Disappointment is not caused by what happened, it's caused by the gap between what happened and what you expected to happen. And the bigger the gap, the stronger the reaction. That's why two people can experience the same situation and feel completely different about it. One is upset, the other is unaffected. Not because the situation changed, but because their expectations were different. One was attached, the other was not. And that's the key. Attachment is the hidden force behind most reactions. You're not reacting to reality, you're reacting to the violation of your expectations. And once you see that clearly, you begin to understand something powerful. The problem is not what people do. The problem is what you expected them to do. And that realization shifts everything. Because now, the focus is no longer external, it's internal. Instead of trying to control people, you start examining your expectations. Instead of reacting to outcomes, you start questioning your attachments. And in that process, you begin to loosen the grip those expectations have on you. But this doesn't mean you stop having standards. It doesn't mean you accept anything. It means you separate standards from expectations. Standards are internal. They guide your behavior, your decisions, your boundaries. Expectations are external. They try to control what others do. And when you confuse the two, you suffer because you're trying to control something that isn't yours to control. You can have standards for how you act, for what you tolerate, for what you accept in your life. But the moment you expect others to meet those standards automatically, you create dependency. And dependency leads to disappointment. So the shift is simple, but not easy. You maintain your standards, but you release your expectations. You act with clarity, but you don't attach to outcomes. You engage with people, but you don't demand they behave a certain way. And when they don't, you don't react emotionally. You respond strategically. If it aligns with your standards, you continue. If it doesn't, you adjust. You step back. You create distance. You move on without resentment, without frustration, without emotional weight, because you were never attached in the first place. And that's what true detachment looks like. Not isolation, not coldness, freedom. The ability to experience life fully without being controlled by it. To interact with people without being dependent on them. To engage with situations without losing your center. And that kind of detachment is misunderstood. People think it means you don't care, that you become distant, unemotional. But that's not true. You still feel, you still experience, but you're not controlled. You don't cling, you don't demand, you don't expect reality to bend to your preferences. And because of that, you move through life with a different kind of energy, light, stable, unshaken, because nothing has a hold on you. And that's where real peace comes from. Not from controlling the world, but from releasing your need to control it. But there's something even deeper here, because expectations don't just affect how you see others, they affect how you see yourself. The expectations you place on your own life, your progress, your success, the timeline you think things should follow. And when reality doesn't match that, you feel like you're falling behind, like something is wrong, like you're not where you should be. But again, based on what? A timeline you created? A comparison to others? An idea of how life should look? None of that is real. It's all constructed. And the moment you attach your sense of worth to those expectations, you create internal pressure, constant tension, a feeling that you're never enough, that you're always chasing something just out of reach. But when you release that, when you stop measuring your life against expectations, something shifts. You stop rushing, you stop forcing, you start moving with clarity, with intention, without the weight of needing things to be different. And that doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. Because now, your actions are not driven by pressure, they're driven by purpose. And that difference is everything. Because pressure creates reaction, purpose creates direction. And when you operate from direction instead of reaction, your entire life changes, quietly, internally, without needing external validation, without needing everything to go your way, because now you're no longer attached to outcomes. You're committed to the process, and that's where stability comes from. But there's still one final layer, one last attachment that keeps people trapped even after they let go of expectations. The attachment to control itself, the need to feel like you're in control at all times. And in the next part, we break that illusion completely. Because true control is not about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. There is one final illusion that keeps even the most aware people trapped. It's not obvious. It doesn't look like weakness. In fact, it often feels like strength. The need to be in control, not just of yourself, but of everything around you, of outcomes, of situations, of how people behave, of how life unfolds. And at first, it makes sense. Control feels safe, predictable, stable. If you can control everything, nothing can hurt you. Nothing can surprise you. Nothing can throw you off balance. But here's the truth most people never accept. You were never in control of those things. Not really. You can influence, you can act, you can prepare. But control, That's an illusion. Because the moment your sense of peace depends on controlling something outside of you, you've already lost it. Think about it. You plan something and it doesn't go the way you expect it. You expect someone to respond a certain way and they don't. You try to manage a situation and it shifts in a direction you didn't anticipate. And instantly you feel it. Tension, frustration, the urge to fix it, to adjust, to force it back into alignment with your expectations. That's the illusion of control breaking. And the discomfort you feel is the result of resisting that break, because deep down you believed you had control. And now reality is showing you you don't. But instead of accepting that, most people double down. They try harder, push more, force outcomes, control conversations, manipulate situations, all in an attempt to regain that sense of control. But the more they do that, the more unstable they become, because now their emotional state is tied to variables they cannot fully manage. And that creates constant tension, constant vigilance, constant stress, because they're trying to hold on to something that was never theirs to begin with. True control is something else entirely. It's not about controlling what happens. It's about controlling how you respond to what happens. And that distinction changes everything, because now your stability is internal, not dependent on outcomes, not dependent on people, not dependent on circumstances aligning with your expectations. You act, you do what you can, you move with intention, but you don't attach your peace to the result. And that's what most people struggle with. They think letting go of control means giving up, becoming passive, accepting whatever happens without resistance. But that's not what this is. This is precision. You focus on me only where it actually has impact. Your thoughts, your actions, your responses. And you release everything else, not because it doesn't matter, but because it's not yours to control. And that shift removes an enormous amount of pressure, because now you're no longer trying to manage the unpredictable. You're grounded in what is stable, yourself. But here's where it becomes powerful, because when you stop trying to control everything, you actually become more effective. Your decisions become clearer, your actions become sharper, your presence becomes calmer, because you're no longer operating from fear. Fear of things going wrong, fear of losing control, fear of outcomes not aligning with your expectations. You're operating from clarity, and clarity is far more powerful than control, because control tries to force reality. Clarity understands it, and when you understand reality, you move with it, not against it. But to reach that level, you have to let go of something deeper. The need for certainty, the need to know how things will unfold, to feel secure in the outcome, to eliminate unpredictability, because life doesn't offer that. It never has. And the more you try to create certainty, the more you'll feel unstable when it disappears. Because certainty is temporary. It can change at any moment. But your ability to adapt, to remain grounded, to stay composed, that's what creates real stability. Not knowing what will happen, but knowing that whatever happens, you can handle it. And that's a completely different mindset. It's not about controlling the future. It's about trusting your ability to respond to it. And that trust removes fear, because now you're not dependent on things going your way. You're confident in your ability to deal with things when they don't. And that's what makes you unshakable. Not because nothing goes wrong, but because nothing that goes wrong controls you. But there's something even deeper, because the need for control is often rooted in something else. Fear of vulnerability, fear of uncertainty, fear of not being enough. Control becomes a way to protect yourself, to create structure, to avoid unpredictability. But that protection comes at a cost. It limits your freedom. It keeps you rigid. It makes you resistant to change because you're trying to hold everything in place. But life doesn't work like that. It moves constantly. And the more you resist that movement, the more friction you create, the more tension you feel, the more you suffer. But when you let go, not of action, but of attachment, something shifts. You become flexible, adaptable, present. You stop trying to force life into a fixed structure and start moving with it. And that's where real control emerges, not from holding on, but from knowing when to let go, when to act, when to step back, when to speak, when to remain silent. Not based on fear, but based on awareness. And that awareness becomes your anchor because it's stable. It doesn't depend on outcomes. It doesn't shift with circumstances. It's always available. And from that place, you move differently. You plan, but you're not attached. You act, but you're not dependent. You engage, but you're not controlled. And that balance is what most people never find, because they're either trying to control everything or they've given up completely. But the real power is in the middle, controlled internally, detached externally. And once you reach that point, something changes permanently. You stop fearing uncertainty. You stop needing things to go your way. You stop trying to manage everything because you realize you don't need to. You've already mastered the only thing that matters, yourself. And in the next part, we bring everything together into a level of presence that makes you completely unshakable, not because nothing affects you, but because nothing controls you anymore. At this point, something inside you should feel different, not louder, not more emotional, but quieter, more stable. Like a part of you is starting to step back and observe everything more clearly. And this is where most people misunderstand the journey. They think becoming strong means becoming harder, more aggressive, more dominant, less emotional. But that's not strength, that's armor. And armor is heavy. It requires constant effort to maintain, constant defense, constant awareness of threats. That's not freedom, that's tension. Real strength is something else entirely. It's light, still, unforced. It doesn't need to defend itself because it's not under threat. And that's the state you're moving toward. Not becoming reactive in a smarter way, but becoming someone who is no longer easily moved at all, untouchable. Not because nothing happens, but because nothing penetrates your center. Imagine this. Someone tries to provoke you, insult you, test you, and instead of reacting, something inside you remains still, not suppressed, not forced, just naturally unaffected. You see the words, you hear the tone, you understand the intent, but there's no internal disturbance, no surge of emotion pulling you to respond, just awareness, clear, detached, present. And in that moment, you realize something. You're free, free from the need to react, free from the need to prove, free from the need to protect an identity that no longer feels fragile, because now your sense of self is not dependent on external input. It's grounded internally, stable, independent. And that's what makes you untouchable. But this state is not something you perform, it's not something you pretend to be, because people can feel that They can sense when you're forcing calm versus when you are calm. True stillness doesn't come from control. It comes from understanding. Deep understanding of how your mind works, of where your reactions come from, of what actually matters and what doesn't. And when you see all of that clearly, your reactions naturally begin to fade. Not because you're trying to stop them, but because they no longer make sense. They no longer serve a purpose. Because what are you reacting to? Words, opinions, perceptions? None of those have inherent power. They only have the power you give them. And once you stop giving them that power, they become neutral. Just sounds, just behavior, just moments that pass. And that's when your presence changes. You become someone who doesn't absorb unnecessary energy, someone who doesn't engage in pointless conflict, someone who doesn't get pulled into emotional chaos, and that presence is rare because most people are constantly reacting, constantly absorbing, constantly being influenced by everything around them. But you, when you reach this state, move differently. You enter a room and you're aware, not of what people think, but of what's actually happening. You listen, not to respond, but to understand. You speak, not to impress, but to express clearly. And when something doesn't align, you don't react emotionally. You adjust quietly, without drama, without tension. And that's what makes you powerful. Not because you dominate the environment, but because the environment doesn't dominate you. But here's the deeper layer, because being untouchable is not just about how you handle others, it's about how you handle yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your internal dialogue, because the same principle applies. Just because a thought appears doesn't mean it's true. Just because an emotion arises doesn't mean it needs to be acted on. Just because you feel something doesn't mean it defines you. And once you see that clearly, consistently, your internal world becomes just as stable as your external one. You stop believing every thought. You stop following every emotion. You stop identifying with every reaction. And that creates a level of inner peace that most people never experience because they are constantly at the mercy of their own mind. But you are observing it. And that observation gives you control. Not control in the sense of forcing things, but control in the sense of not being controlled. And that's the highest level, because now nothing owns you. Not people, not situations, not emotions, not even your own thoughts. You are present, aware, grounded. And from that place, your actions become precise. You don't overreact, you don't underreact. You respond exactly as needed, no more, no less. And that precision is what makes you effective, because now every move is intentional. Every word has weight, every action is aligned with clarity, but there's something else that happens at this level, something most people don't expect. You become less interested in conflict, less interested in proving points, less interested in being right, because you see how unnecessary it all is, how much energy people waste trying to win arguments that don't matter, trying to prove things that don't change anything. And you step out of that completely, not because you can't engage, but because you choose not to. And that choice is power, because now your energy is preserved, focused, directed only where it actually matters, toward growth, toward purpose, toward things that move your life forward, not sideways, not into unnecessary tension. And that's when your life starts to feel different, Not easier, but clearer. Less noise, less chaos. Less emotional weight, more space, more focus, more control. And in that space, you start to build something real, not based on reaction, but based on intention, not based on emotion, but based on clarity. And that's the foundation of a strong mind. Not one that reacts well, but one that doesn't need to react at all. And in the next part, we go into the final transformation, the shift from understanding to embodiment, where this is no longer something you think about, but something you are. At a certain point, understanding is no longer enough. You can know everything we've talked about. You can see your patterns. You can recognize your reactions. You can even pause, observe, and choose differently. But still, under pressure, something pulls you back. The old reaction, the old emotion, the old identity. And that's where most people stop. They understand, but they don't transform. Because transformation is not about knowing, it's about embodiment. Becoming it, living it, until it's no longer something you do, but something you are. And that shift is where everything becomes real. Because knowledge can disappear under pressure, but embodiment remains. It's stable, automatic, effortless. Think about it like this. Right now, your reactions are automatic. You don't think before you feel. You don't decide before you react. It just happens. That's conditioning. Years of repetition, of reinforcing the same patterns over and over again. And if you want to change that, you need to build new patterns with the same level of consistency, not occasionally, not when you remember, but every time, every trigger, every situation, every moment you feel that pull to react. That's your opportunity, not to suppress it, not to fight it, but to practice something different, to pause, to observe, to choose. And at first, it will feel unnatural, forced, slow, because you're interrupting a pattern that has been running your entire life. But if you stay consistent, something begins to shift. The pause becomes easier, the observation becomes clearer, the reaction loses intensity, and over time, the pattern weakens. Until one day, you realize something. The reaction doesn't come anymore, not because you stopped it, but because it's no longer there. And that's embodiment, when the new way of being replaces the old one completely. But to reach that point, you need to understand something critical. You don't rise to the level of your understanding, you fall to the level of your conditioning. Under pressure, you don't become better, you become automatic. And that's why repetition matters. Not just thinking about these ideas, but living them, practicing them, embodying them in real situations. When someone tests you, when something doesn't go your way, when you feel that familiar surge of emotion, that's where the work happens. Not in theory, not in reflection, in the moment. Because that's where your patterns are active, and that's where they can be changed. But there's something even deeper, because embodiment is not just about changing your reactions, it's about changing your identity, the way you see yourself. Because as long as you see yourself as someone who gets triggered, who reacts, who is affected, you will continue to reinforce that pattern, even if you try to act differently. But when your identity shifts, everything else follows. When you start seeing yourself as someone who is calm, grounded, in control, that becomes your baseline. That becomes your default state, not something you try to be, but something you are. And your actions naturally align with that identity. You don't force yourself to stay calm. You are calm. You don't try not to react. You simply don't feel the need to. And that's a completely different level, because now your behavior is not something you manage. It's something that reflects who you've become. But identity doesn't change instantly. It changes through evidence, through repeated experience. Every time you choose awareness over reaction, you reinforce that identity. Every time you stay composed under pressure, you strengthen it. Every time you remain unaffected by something that used to trigger you, you confirm it. And over time, those moments accumulate. They build a new self-image, one that is stable, consistent, real. And once that identity is established, something shifts permanently. You stop questioning yourself. You stop doubting your ability to remain in control, because you've proven it, not once, not twice, but consistently. And that consistency creates confidence, not loud confidence, not performative confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation, because it's built on experience, on proof, on reality. And from that place, you move differently. You don't prepare for situations emotionally. You don't anticipate reactions. You don't worry about how you'll feel, because you know whatever happens, you'll remain grounded. And that certainty changes how you engage with the world. You become more direct, more clear, more present, because you're not managing internal chaos anymore. You're operating from stability, and that stability becomes your foundation. But there's one more layer to this, because true embodiment is not rigid. It's not fixed. It's not about becoming a static version of yourself. It's about becoming adaptable, flexible, responsive, without losing your center. You can still feel, still engage, still express, but nothing takes you out of alignment. Nothing pulls you into unconscious reaction, because your awareness is always there, quietly observing, guiding, anchoring you in the present moment. And that's what makes it sustainable, because you're not forcing a state. You're living from it, naturally, effortlessly, consistently. And at that point, something interesting happens. You stop thinking about control entirely. You stop analyzing your reactions. You stop trying to manage your emotions, because it's already integrated, already part of who you are. And that's when you know the transformation is complete, not because you reached a certain level, but because it no longer feels like something you're trying to achieve. It just is. And in the final part, we bring everything together, not as ideas, not as concepts, but as a way of living. A level of presence that most people never reach, but once you do, changes everything. At the end of all of this, there is no technique left, no method to apply, no rule to follow. Because what you've been building was never meant to stay as knowledge. It was meant to become you, a way of being, a presence, a state that doesn't need effort to maintain. And when you reach this point, something becomes very clear. The world hasn't changed. People are still unpredictable, situations are still unstable, disrespect still exists, chaos still appears, but none of it reaches you the same way anymore, not because you've avoided it, not because you've controlled it, but because you've outgrown your need to react to it. And that's the final shift. You're no longer trying to be calm, you are calm. You're no longer trying to control your emotions. They no longer control you. You're no longer trying to prove your strength. You don't feel the need to. Because real strength is no longer something you show. It's something you carry quietly, constantly, without effort. And people feel it, not through what you say, but through what you don't say. Not through how you react, but through how you remain still when reaction is expected. Because most people are easy to read, easy to trigger, easy to influence. Their emotions are visible. Their reactions are predictable. Their state is dependent on what happens around them. But you are different now. You've stepped out of that pattern. You've broken the loop. You've seen through the illusion. And because of that, you move in a way most people don't understand. You don't chase respect, but you receive it. You don't demand attention, but you attract it. You don't force control, but you have it. Because control was never about others. It was always about you. And now you've mastered that. But here's the part most people miss. This isn't about becoming distant from life. It's not about detaching from everything. It's about engaging without losing yourself, being present without being pulled, feeling without being controlled. That's the balance, that's the level. And once you reach it, life becomes different. Not easier, but clearer. You see things as they are, not as your emotions distort them. You respond based on awareness, not impulse. You act with intention, not reaction. And that clarity gives you an advantage most people don't have. Because while they're reacting, you're observing. While they're emotional, you're composed. While they're trying to control the situation, you're already in control of yourself. And that changes everything. Because the person who controls themselves cannot be controlled by others. And that's what makes you untouchable. Not in a physical sense, not in a social sense, but in the only place that truly matters: your mind, your state, your internal world. No one can enter that unless you allow them. No one can disturb that unless you give them permission. And once you realize that deeply, fully, something inside you becomes unshakable, a calm that doesn't depend on silence, a stability that doesn't depend on circumstances, a confidence that doesn't depend on validation. And that's rare, because most people spend their entire lives trying to control the outside world without ever mastering what's inside. But you've done the opposite. You've gone inward. You've faced your patterns, your reactions, your attachments, and you've transformed them, not by force, but by awareness, by understanding, by consistency, and now the result is visible, not through effort, but through presence. And from this point forward, everything you do carries that energy. Every word, every action, every decision, because it's no longer something you turn on or off. It's who you are. And the most powerful part, you don't need anyone to recognize it. You don't need anyone to validate it. You don't need anyone to understand it, because it's not for them. It's for you, your peace, your clarity, your control. And that's the highest level of freedom. Not freedom from the world, but freedom within it. To move through chaos without becoming chaotic. To face pressure without breaking. To experience life fully without losing yourself in it. And once you reach that state, there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to defend, nothing left to chase, because you've already found what most people spend their lives looking for: control, not over others, but over yourself. And that is power.